This is the Digital Formula Podcast, a show about digital transformations, why they fail, and how you can apply the formula to ensure that your transformation program will create the expected results. By aligning your services to your strategy, architect solutions well, and deliver them in an agile fashion.
And welcome to another episode of the Digital Formula Podcast. And of course, my name is Roland Volt, and I'm, as always, joined by my co-host, Mike Eidengren. Hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
Hey, Roland, great to be back.
Did you say that the last time and you still come back? I'm very impressed.
I just can't get enough architecture.
That is true. Speaking of architecture, the topic of today is obviously Agile Enterprise Architecture. And I have so many questions about that. But luckily, we have a guest here. Christo, maybe you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Absolutely. So, hello, my name is Christo Lute. I am an enterprise architect and have been for about 15 years. I got very lucky at the beginning of my career to get hired into Boeing, right into an enterprise architecture role. Did not know anything about EA, probably should not have been thrown into the deep end there, but the luck is in finding a really complex, compelling, curious space that bridges between business and technology, and I've loved it. I've stuck with it ever since. After Boeing, I moved on to healthcare, worked at Premera Blue Cross, and then Matrix Medical Network, doing digital transformation, enterprise architecture, some change management as well, so the people side of change. Mm-hmm. And eventually ran into Mike and learned about this really sweet opportunity for a giant, difficult transformation project that seemed, at the time, and Mike, you probably can speak to this too, like one of the most complex, difficult, large-scale transformation efforts I had ever heard of. And I was like, sign me up. I love that challenge. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, from a personal perspective, before we dive into the obviously topic of the day, can you talk a little bit about yourself as a person?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have been married for 13 years. I got married really young and got lucky to meet someone who is just amazing. Her name's Mary. We have a new puppy that we have been training. Her name's Susie. And outside of like the family space, I split time between Seattle and Jackson, Mississippi right now, and some time in Mexico and Colorado. Ever since COVID, I've been doing a little bit more of the digital nomad activity, and that's been awesome and fun to do. Hobbies wise, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've been doing that for about 10 years at this point. And then I'm learning piano, and I do lots of writing for like poetry and blog posting and whatever I feel like writing.
That is interesting. So, well, we can see if there's some poetry in architecture.
Let's maybe a haiku at least.
Yes. I found it very interesting. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you know that. WordPress, the content management system, they had the tagline "Code is poetry" for years. I don't know if they still have it, but I thought that's
a little
nice.
Sweet.
Yeah, it was really nice. Well, but let's go into the topic of the show. So, what is Agile EA? The title of our show today, because I have not seen those two terms, 3 words, combined with each other. So maybe do some definitions first.
Yes, yeah. A classic architecture activity by itself. So let's maybe define it in chunks. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what is enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture, very broadly, has tons of different definitions that you can quibble over what it is. I tend to focus in on the fundamental value proposition that enterprise architecture has, which is allowing you to do business planning and understand how the business plans, objectives, goals, whatever you'd like to call them, match up with the assets, resources, people, organizational structure in order to deliver on those goals. So it's really this space where you bring together planning activities around the business and the technology, processes, people, all that stuff in order to create both a picture of what that landscape looks like, but also to say, how are we going to get from where we are today to what we're trying to accomplish as an organization?
Christo, in my experience, like when we say enterprise architecture to a lot of folks, they think, oh, that's about technology. And they immediately want to start talking about let's get the cloud architecture picture together and let's figure out how we're going to integrate security and so on, right? But, it sounds like you're talking about really the big idea here is to figure out how to make better investments, right? How to make better decisions on where you're going to invest and where you're not going to.
Yes, better decisions, better investments, exactly. And to do that, you can't ignore how your business is operating. So that might be your processes. You can't ignore the skill sets or the roles that people have within your organization. So there's a people element there. You can't ignore the data. And you can do that in two ways. You can talk about data as the actual bits and bytes. So how are you storing that and moving it? But also the layer of abstraction above that is thinking about information. Like, what does this data do? So you could do information architecture, information modeling, and look how the information flows through your organization. Those are not technical things. I haven't mentioned a single piece of software there. You might imagine your data could be stored in a warehouse or something like that, but those could be pieces of paper as well. Like before we had computers, we were doing information in books and documents and ledgers. That's still architecture. That's still information. You need that in order to really understand the impact of your investments, where you really have opportunity to find improvement from your investments, as well as to have like alignment and transparency around what the rest of the organization is doing. Usually EA, you need it when your organization gets to a certain size because there's too many values and too many different perspectives within the organization. So you need alignment. So that's when you start seeing EA. It's probably not great in terms of a discipline for like a 2-person company. It's awesome for 100 and above.
Well, so first of all, I think the data...
We should argue, yeah.
yeah.
You may disagree, that's okay.
Just to have it said, the data on paper will still be here after we all are gone, and the ants rule the world, versus all of our wonderful computer systems. But I also think maybe a second aspect, and we're going to talk about that in the second half of the show, is obviously how do you design your solutions, right? And that is more than just IT implementation. But
totally has to be.
Before we get to this, let's talk about the other topic in Agile EA. So what makes EA Agile? And you can choose if you want to write it with an uppercase or a lowercase a, if there's a difference.
So if we put on our scaled Agile hats, the reason that you do Agile is so that you can organize across multiple teams that are Agile teams, self-directed, self-defining teams that are delivering value over short cadences instead of a giant waterfall project where you have to wait 6 months to get value. You break up the work into smaller chunks and it's really towards business value. Mm-hmm. So customer centricity being like the core of the scaled Agile framework. The reason you would combine Agile with EA is you still need to think about how does this affect the people, process, technology, data, systems of your organization. And in the Scaled Agile framework, they talk about this idea of the architecture runway. And so building enabling features within your organization to say, hey, do I have the infrastructure, the software, whatever it might be. It could be, hey, go redesign your processes to make sure you can actually deliver on the value to your customer. So Agile being something you do iteratively, you learn as you go, you deliver value as you go, makes more sense than waiting to deliver a giant scale architecture model or picture that everyone hasn't quite agreed to. I'm sure you both have experienced this, where you get these giant models and your architecture team has been off in the corner talking about all the ways they're going to use these awesome frameworks like DODAF or TOGAF and quibbling over details and ontologies. But then you get business folks into the room and they're like, I don't see myself in the picture. Where do I fit in? How does this actually get me to my targets? How do I outcompete my competitors?
And of course, time to market
is
like a really big concept too, right? And of course, Agile people will tell you that all day long. Like, how do we chunk up the work and prioritize it, right? And we have these stories and these little Jira tickets. But when you talk to technology people, they're on a whiteboard. They're drawing very complex diagrams and integrations between systems. And man, the hard part here seems to be, how do you get the technology people to chunk their plans and solutions into smaller bits so we can actually align that with the intent of the agility folks, the coaches and the product managers and the product owners who really just want to get something out the door that is the most valuable thing to get out the door, right?
Yes. Mike, you made me think of this other problem that I think is really, really common where Agile fits into this. It's very, very common for the business to define its goals or objectives and then pivot because they discover something new in the market or a competitor moves. But technology tends to be a little bit more of a longer term investment, especially if you're doing the development and not just like purchasing off the shelf. So you need an IT organization or a technology organization that can be dynamic as well. In order to do that, you need to have a plan that can be dynamic and agile as well. Otherwise, you're slow, lethargic, you build up tech debt.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Yeah, so
Roland.
I hear two things here. One is culture change, right? How do we get the people to this? And Mike and I, we've worked in a small audit firm where we try to bring Agile to auditors, which was an interesting experience, to say at least.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
We can have that when we talk about a cup of milk, and I will share more details with you.
Okay.
And the second thing is, I think when you take a solution and plan it, and do your architecture work, it's not that it's like software development. You take one feature and you develop that feature and whatnot. You might have to split your higher level patterns, your higher level constructs, and all that stuff. And I heard that runway thing in my mind. You need to split it on the timeline and maybe do it before, so that when then a software team comes in, they can build on that foundation. So it's not captured in itself. Am I right with that assumption, or do you have a different opinion on that?
I think you're dead on. I think one of the benefits, so Mike, you asked this great question, or you kind of pointed this feature out that when folks think about enterprise architecture, they tend to think technology. And my constant pushback here is to say it's way more than technology. You have to split it between the types of problems that lead you to the longer term solutions. And so we'll get to this probably later in the interview, but splitting things between what does it look like to focus on process or on just your applications or on your governance and risk, or what is even like a good sustainable architecture practice look like? Because there's some of the entrances into these larger problems around how do you drive business value? How do you create alignment for leadership? How do you actually make good investments?
And even like user experience, right, Christo?
Yeah,
because, I mean, think about the trade-off between, wow, we want something really easy and simple to use. And the security folks saying, nope, you're going to have to log into it with a really complex password. And you got to log into 3 other systems with a really complex different password. And so we look to solutions, to architects to say, look, how can you lay some runway, for example, to do one sign-on system to all the websites I have to log into? Now that's a pretty interesting example of architecture runway, right?
Right. And what your example makes me think of, Mike, is you're not just talking about like making it easy for your user. Your user would prefer not to log in. What you're trying to do is you're trying to say, hey, I have some values around the user experience. I have some values around my cybersecurity. I have some values around the cost. I have to weigh all of these things. These are not simple decisions. How do I balance that and develop a solution that will fit as best I can these values and some of the trade-offs I have to make around that? That's the job of an executive. That's a difficult job. Anything to support that activity, let's bring it to the table. I think that's why EA is so valuable.
Yeah, I just get a question, obviously non-scripted for those of you who
let's
listen
go.
to it. So let's see if Christo reacts eloquently on those things. What I'm thinking is then, if there's such a value, why don't I see a lot of enterprise architects in organizations? And maybe on top of it, if I see some, and that's a couple of years ago, those are the guys who sit in the ivory tower. So what are your recommendations or your case for an organization to stand up an EA capability?
I love your question. That's such a compelling question. I'm thinking of 3 or 4 different ways I could possibly answer it. I think my first answer, and maybe it sounds a little self-promoting, a little arrogant even, is I just think that enterprise architects have special minds. It takes a special sort of person to feel comfortable thinking and talking and being interested in the nuts and bolts of technology, who also at the same time has good communication skills and is able to talk to other people regardless of where they are in the hierarchy of an organization, and who also cares about business value, or how does this connect to my processes? There's a lot of different types of questions and different frames that you have to kind of put your head into in order to be an architect. And I think that's just sort of rare, partially because we box people into a specific skill set and we say, do this, and then people climb the ladder within that skill set. And also, I just think it's sort of special to be curious like that, to be multi-talented, multi-interested. And so I think part of it is the reason you don't see a lot of architects is they're just kind of rare. So again, a little self-promoting here. I'm special. All of us on this call are special in this way. I think.
Yeah, I asked your mother; she agrees.
Yeah. Oh, great. Good. Thanks, Mom. I think another thing that's a feature, and maybe this is where I would mildly push back even against the question. My suspicion is, for most organizations that have been around, let's say they've been around for 5 years or longer, is that you have folks who are doing architecture style things within their job role. They're either deep experts in some set of systems and the integrations of those systems, and they understand because of some project 2 years ago how that interplays with some part of the business. They have an architect-y sort of picture of the organization. They just may not be calling themselves an architect. They may not be thinking broadly. There may be no practice of architecture at your company. So it's a little ad hoc. I think that's really, really common. The way I would approach that is probably by trying to start an architecture discipline and finding those people to put into that discipline. And then on top of that, there's a need for those same people with all of that knowledge, that tribal knowledge about your organization, to also want to be change agents. Architecture kind of fundamentally is around the future and what is going to happen next, and building what the future state of your organization should look like. And if your attitude is, well, I want to just keep my little territory, keep working in the same technology, keep doing the same thing, you're kind of a bad fit for architecture, even though you have that deep knowledge. So you have to be orientated towards change and kind of embrace that. But if you can find those people who think that way, who are open to the possibility of change and have tribal knowledge and relationships, that's a superpower. You have a team of very, very competent people who can make that change, get the buy-in. That's a perfect condition for a new enterprise architecture practice. I think the last reason that we think architects are so rare is partially we've done it to ourselves a bit. We have this very technical discipline that started with this Zachman framework and these kind of esoteric frameworks around here's what your ontology of objects should look like. And I love that stuff. My brain works that way. I love thinking sort of in the set theory of business objects. And that's really great, but that's so esoteric and arcane to normal people. And it doesn't seem valuable. And in some ways, it's not that valuable if it doesn't tie to how you make investments or better decisions or how you get speed to market or anything like that. And so you get these kind of crunchy, nerdy types like me who spend all day out in the ivory tower thinking about how do these objects fit together and how do I tinker with these logic bits, essentially. And they don't connect to why am I valuable? And they also tend to be blockers. This phenomenon of the architecture review board is a tricky spot because you do need to make some decisions and have some governance both over your architecture or just broadly your organization. But if you become a blocker, if you stop decisions from being made, if you demand that everything go through a rigorous review process that takes months, people are going to find a way to get around you. They're going to stop working with you. So some of that is part of the whole picture. I think architects are rare. They probably exist within your organization, but they aren't called an architect. And the history of architecture is that there's this common pattern of becoming a blocker and kind of a slow, lethargic sort of activity. And so companies look at that and they say, this is slowing down my speed to market. It's slowing down my ability to perform. We're getting rid of these guys.
I have so many thoughts about this right
bring it
now,
on.
especially around the committee of no.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So, which should be KNOW, by the way, not NO, right? But I also can imagine that some of the brains of our listeners are now starting to explode, and we want to give them a little relief and have a short break. And we will come back right after this.
Do you have that feeling like something may not be right with your service delivery or how you're using your ServiceNow platform? LSA Digital is your partner in turning that around. We understand that every organization is unique, which is why we offer a free 30-minute consultation to identify the perfect fit assessment for you. Whether you're looking to refine your current practices or undertake a thorough transformation, our tailored assessments align with your goals to deliver actionable insights and measurable outcomes. Connect with us today. Let's unlock the full potential of your ServiceNow platform and service management practices. LSA Digital. We're not just consultants, we're your strategic allies for ServiceNow and service management optimization.
All right, Christo, thanks for that overview on Agile EA and some of that great discussion and use cases about what it is and what it isn't. In this part, too, we want to talk about a little bit more about decomposing the elements of Agile Enterprise Architecture. So give us an idea, Christo, what's in the box?
Great question, Mike. And there are a few different ways I can answer this, but the way I like to answer this when I'm talking to folks who maybe don't know what enterprise architecture is or have only encountered it in those IT guys off in their room making big wall charts is around the problems that an organization has and the solutions or types of things you can do to meet those problems. So one example would be, hey, I know what my ecosystem looks like. I know roughly what my processes are, what applications I have. But I know also I want to be more competitive in the future, or I know that the systems I have are becoming monolithic and I want to break them up, or I have these types of problems. What an architect might do is they might look at the territory, maybe look to see what available technologies there are or ways to improve processes or even change up org structures as it might be, and design solutions that usually describe here are your trade-offs that you're making between these various solutions. Here's what the future looks like. If you want to go really fast to market, we can do this, but that may increase your risk, or it's going to be pretty costly for you because we're going to have the latest whiz-bang technology in order to do that. But an architect, because they have that broad view of the organization, they can make some of those recommendations. They usually also have the relationships necessary to ensure they're not just inventing a pie-in-the-sky idea. They know what it's actually going to take in order to make that change. So one is solution design. That's one thing within the EA package. Another is around business process. And this can be analysis of your business processes or cataloging them. It can also be modeling, simulating, mining those processes and making sure you understand what are people working on, what stuff could get automated, and what stuff might just be legacy and you need to stop doing that activity at all. You can sometimes even map your processes to things like value streams or your capabilities to say, I'm investing in the right spot and the right types of processes. Another really common front door for enterprise architecture is looking at your applications. Most organizations now have some type of IT department and they're working with some type of software technology. Looking at that and saying, hey, does this technology still make sense? When we purchased this or invested into it, it probably made sense. You went through some sort of review process, but does it still make sense? Is it, can I rationalize continuing to invest in this, or do you need to wind it down and find some other replacement? We just call that application rationalization. Very, very common activity for enterprise architecture to engage in. The advanced version of that is to say, okay, I'm not just doing a point in time, look at my applications and rationalize them. I want to manage the portfolio of applications that I have. I want to do this proactively going forward. That's another space that architecture can play in.
And you could think this forward
Yep.
by extending this to technology, puffy clouds,
Any technology.
cables and
Yes,
boxes,
exactly. Yep.
and that stuff. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Another kind of angle that enterprise architecture is going to look at is around things like your policies, procedures, security. And sometimes these things they feel like they get in the way, or they can be tricky to deal with. But coming out of manufacturing, aviation, healthcare, for a lot of industries, these are just like the facts of the playing field. And you have to be able to prove that you are compliant with various regulations. And so being able to show, hey, we have these policies in place that I need to be compliant with. Here's how we fulfill those things. Here's the systems or the processes or the policies, documentations we've written. That's really critical. That's usually an enterprise spanning activity. It's not just one spot you have to do that. It's your whole organization that needs to be compliant.
And you create the foundation then for all the risk people, right?
Exactly.
When you think about first, second level, third level of defense, they need processes, they need the catalogs, all that wonderful stuff.
Yes. And then one of the other areas that I think is becoming more and more present, especially with product management being a whole discipline, and definitely included within the skilled Agile framework, is around user experience and thinking, what is it like to be the user of any part of either my software, or to be an employee at a company, to say, what's making me get stuck? Where are my pain points? What is not working about that? And so you might go in and you might ask employees or ask people, what's not working? What's clunky about your day job? And that could be an incredible entry point to start talking about technology problems or process problems, or even just why are we not getting our speed to market, or where are those other issues? So you start to get, the word I use a lot here is legibility. Before, you were squinting and trying to look down into your organization, and it's not readable. You don't know exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. And what architecture drives is that legibility. It starts to become readable. You can say, I see what the territory is like now. I can make better decisions because I can see the territory.
I like that. I will steal that term going on forward. Thank you. You get no compensation for it. But I have one more question, and I know we're getting at the top of our time. Just before the break, we spoke about governance and how to set this up and all those things, because I think, or in my observation, a lot of EA teams failed, and I literally worked in an organization where they fired all the enterprise architects because they couldn't communicate their value, right? But they were very good in setting up rules and boundaries and decision-making processes and all that type of stuff. So what is your opinion on that whole field around governance, the orgs that come out of this, like COEs and ARBs and all that type of stuff?
Honestly, I am a little skeptical of most of the stuff that I have seen. Coming from Boeing and started kind of cutting my teeth there, the level of sort of oversight and barrier taught me a lot about what I don't think is healthy for an organization. No offense, Boeing, you're very good at bureaucracy. I don't think that's great for every organization.
Yeah, I heard they have other problems.
They have other problems these days, so I'm not so worried that that's their chief problem at this point. I think the key thing I guess the way I want to translate your question is, how would I advise folks who are trying to start an enterprise architecture practice? Like, where would I start first? You need to make sure that you're working with stakeholders that see the value of the insights. People are going to feel like you're going to take over some of their space, or that you're doing their job, some business analysis, or you're doing some other role within IT. The nature of an enterprise architect is they're standing between multiple worlds. And if you can give new answers, drive novel insights to your executive leaders, it does not actually matter whether you're calling yourself an architect or not. You're doing the work of an architect. And as soon as you can do that, driving novel insights, saving the company money that they couldn't have otherwise saved because they needed that broad view analysis, it becomes much easier to say, hey, I really need 3 more of me. Can we find people who think like me? I know a couple guys in the organization, and by the way, we really could use some outside help on a few of these problems, because I don't think there's someone at the company who can do that. That case is much, much easier to make as soon as you have shown, there's a unique way we're thinking. We're looking broadly, but we're trying to see what happens when finance meets IT or operations bumps up against the infrastructure team. These spaces where worlds kind of collide within organizations, that's where the opportunity usually lives for architects.
Well, that sounds good. And I was just thinking, Mike and I wrote an article many, many years ago on CIO.com. I hope it's still there. We'll put it in the show notes for those of you. I think it's the same questions that we asked many, many years ago, which is obviously not a good sign for the discipline of architecture if it hasn't evolved that far. But that might be a topic for another episode sometime in the future. To wrap up the current episode, Christo, and by the way, thank you for being on the show. Very, very interesting talking points that you had. And
Thanks for having me.
I hope you brought the discipline a little bit closer to our listeners. But obviously, as always, the question is, well, how can I reach that Christo guy? You know, that's interesting. And he spoke about this single topic that I want to have more information about. So how can get people a hold of you?
The best way to find me online is to Google my name, Christo Lute. I have a LinkedIn. I think the LinkedIn URL is Christo Lute or Christo-Lute. I'm very easy to find. There are very few Christos out there in the world. So that's the easiest way to find me. You can also contact us through LSA's website and get in contact with me there. I'm happy to talk with you.
Yeah, and I definitely will put all that information into the show notes. Great. So that, as I like to say, nobody currently driving needs to stop and taking notes. Right? You have it in your app afterwards. Well, and with that, again, thank you, Christo, for being our valued guest. And Mike, I hope I speak on behalf of you. Obviously, thanks to you listeners out there for listening to that presumably dry but very well presented topic of enterprise architecture or agile enterprise architecture by Christo. If you want to do us a favor, well, then go into not only the app and do the usual things like liking and all that stuff, but maybe more importantly, tell your 5 best friends about this podcast, because nothing spreads better than the word of mouth. And we would be happy if more people would listen to our podcast and start the conversation with us. And speaking of that, I'd like to close out the show and wish you all a happy day.